Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the IPPNW Global Classroom. This is our third module on the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Today, we're going to kind of shift away from what we've been talking about so far on the impact of nuclear weapons, on the humanitarian impacts of these weapons, and look at the treaties and what people, meaning both civil society and governments, are doing to push back against the deadly norms of nuclear armed states and what the nuclear armed states themselves are doing to destabilize this world and to increase the nuclear threat. Um, Before we get started today, a few housekeeping items. As always, please remain muted throughout the conversation today. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or wait until the end. As always, we'll have time for Q&A. But again, because today we're talking about treaties and this language might be fairly new to you, if you have questions while we're going on, if you're an acronym that you're not familiar with, please just put it in the chat and we'll have somebody answer you live as we go. Or if you're like me and you know that you won't remember your question, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll make sure that we save that for our Q&A section. As always, we're entering this space with respect for one another. We know that we're coming from different backgrounds, different foundational knowledge, and that there are no questions that are too basic, and that there are no thoughts that aren't welcome to this space. I want to extend my thanks to SGI, Soka Gakkai International, for making the Global Classroom possible. Thank you very, very much to our SGI colleagues. Um, so if you missed the launch or one of our first two modules on Nuclear Weapons 101 and the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons, I encourage you to watch those. I think that those will be incredibly helpful as we get into today's conversation. We know what these weapons do, and now we're going to talk about what we can do to prevent future use of nuclear weapons and to work towards their abolition. Um, Again, this is our third official module. We're going to learn about the 50-year-old Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that's the NPT, which is having its 11th review conference at the UN headquarters in New York City next week. If you're attending the NPT in New York City, maybe put that in the chat. I'd be interested to know who will be there. And if you won't be there, stay tuned from both IPPNW, Reaching Critical Will, ICANN, and many, many other groups for updates throughout the month-long conference. Thank you again for being a part of the classroom. Thank you for joining, whether this is before your day starts, this is your lunch break, or this is well into the evening, as it is for one of our speakers. I really appreciate it, and I genuinely think that the work that we're doing here together and the work that you all are doing in your communities is protecting this world and the people that we love so dearly. So with all of that being said, we're going to dive into the program of the hour. We're going to start with a brief NPT 101 presentation by Namkhai, IPPNW's International Student Board member, followed by keynote remarks by Ray Acheson, the director of Reaching Critical Will, which is the civil society coordinator of the NPT. So I'm going to pass the floor to Namkhai. And while I screen share, let me just quickly share a bit about Namkhai before he takes the floor. Namkhai joined the IPPNW student movement in 2019 and has served as the student representative of Mongolian Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. Over the years, he's organized and participated in national and international projects, and he's currently pursuing a PhD at Hiroshima University in the Phoenix Leader Education Program for Radiation Disaster Medicine, where he studied the biological effects of radiation and the role of physicians in responding to radiation disaster response. Namkhai says that living and studying in Hiroshima has strengthened his personal commitment to peace and nuclear disarmament, and he now holds the role of international student representative on IPPNW's board of directors. So Namkhai is clearly well suited to join us today and to share some information about the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I'm going to screen share. Hope you can see the presentation. Yes. Good. Sorry. Good. Great. All right, Namkhai, go ahead.
Hello everyone, my name is Namkhai Bayasgalan. I'm the international student representative of IPPNW and PhD student in radiation disaster medicine at Hiroshima University, Japan. Before we hear from Ray Acheson, I will briefly introduce the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, its key goals, current challenges, and what IPPNW is calling for at the upcoming review conferences. Next slide, please. So the NPT entered into force in 1970 and is widely considered cornerstone of global nuclear non-proliferation. Today, it has 189 states parties. Next slide, please. There are 5 recognized nuclear weapon states: China, France, United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia. In addition, 4 nuclear armed states remain outside the treaty, which are North Korea, India, Israel, and Pakistan. States parties meet every 5 years at review conference to assess progress and discuss future actions. However, the last 2 review conferences in 2015 and 2020 ended without any agreed outcome document, meaning that states were unable to agree on a path forward. Combined with increasing nuclear rhetoric and continuing disregard for international law by nuclear armed states, this creates rather concerning outlook for the upcoming review conference. Next slide, please. The NPT is built on 3 main pillars. First, non-proliferation, which aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. Second, the peaceful use of nuclear technology, including its applications in energy, medicine, and research. And third, nuclear disarmament. In principle, the treaty is based on what is often called grand bargain. Nuclear weapon states agree not to acquire nuclear weapons, while nuclear weapon states commit to disarmament. In return, all states retain the right to access peaceful use of nuclear technology. Next slide, please. As long as the nuclear armed states continue to uphold nuclear appetite and disregard their disarmament obligations, the NPT will continue to degrade. Next slide, please. In this context, IPPNW calls on states parties at the upcoming review conference to take several steps. This includes reaffirming 2010 NPT outcome and ensuring review conference decisions remain binding beyond the next cycle. It also involves recognizing both horizontal and vertical proliferation increase the risk of nuclear war, and establishing measures to prevent attacks on nuclear facilities that could lead to radiological consequences. Next slide, please. In addition, IPPNW calls for concrete and time-bound disarmament actions by P5. It also encourages constructive engagement with Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. Finally, it emphasizes the need to establish clear separation between AI technologies and nuclear weapons command control systems. More details can be found through our website. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Namkhai. Thanks for giving us that overview before we dive into an analysis by Ray. I really, again, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. It's already past 10 p.m. for Namkhai in Hiroshima. So thank you for joining us and for giving us that presentation. We're now going to hear from Ray Acheson. Ray is the director of Reaching Critical Will, a project working for disarmament and demilitarization. They provide analysis and advocacy at the United Nations on nuclear weapons, autonomous weapons, and the militarization of AI, the arms trade, military spending, and more. Ray served on the steering group of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, which won the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize for its work to ban nuclear weapons. They are the author of Banning the Bomb, Smashing the Patriarchy, and Abolishing State Violence, A World Beyond Bombs, Borders, and Cages, and are a visiting researcher at Princeton University's program on science and global security. I'm looking at both of Ray's books on my bookshelf right now, actually. So I'm a big fan of Ray, and I'm excited for you all to learn from them this morning. So Ray, please take it away.
Thanks so much, Molly. Really appreciate that. I don't have a presentation, I'm sorry to say. It's a really busy time, so I didn't have the opportunity to put one together, but I hope that we can cover some good ground. I've been asked to speak about sticking points and opportunities at this NPT review conference, and also what states and civil society are doing to advance disarmament, because of course the NPT is not the only game in town, and that is certainly a good thing because we are up against it in this moment in terms of what we think we might be able to accomplish over the next month, because the NPT does start next week, which Molly and I were just discussing. We're sort of in denial about that it's upon us already. And I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you there in the hallways of the UN. So to start with some sticking points, of which unfortunately there are many, maybe more than we have faced at any recent point. The past few years, as you all know, have brought increased tensions and outright armed conflict involving several nuclear armed states. Right. So we have Israel and conducting its genocide against Gaza and threatening to use nuclear weapons in that context. We have Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and threats to use nuclear weapons in that context. We have the United States and Israel conducting an unlawful war against Iran, and the US perhaps implicitly last week threatening to use nuclear weapons against Iran, certainly threatening and committing many, many war crimes in the context of that conflict as well. We've seen threats by some of the nuclear armed states to resume explosive nuclear testing. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1996 has not yet come into force, but there has been a widespread moratorium since then on explosive testing. The nuclear armed states, many of them still conduct what they call subcritical tests, laboratory tests, without reaching a fission chain reaction. But the US president last year made some strange remarks that he would resume nuclear testing to stay equal with Russia and China, who are not actually conducting explosive nuclear testing. So it's unclear where that's headed, but there has been some activity at those three test sites over the past years, raising concerns amongst experts who monitor this sort of thing. We've also seen attacks, of course, against nuclear facilities in recent years. So Russia has been occupying nuclear power facilities and attacking nuclear power facilities in Ukraine. There have, of course, been attacks against several Iranian nuclear facilities, uranium enrichment, nuclear power plant facilities throughout the country, both last year and this year. There's nuclear proliferation threats as well, which have been mounting in recent years. Specifically within Europe, this has become quite concerning and widespread. Several European countries are embarking upon new nuclear alliances. France and Germany have signed a memorandum and agreed to have a nuclear deterrence doctrine between them. France has said it's going to expand its doctrine of deterrence to other European countries that would like to be involved in that arrangement. And that is a direct reaction, of course, to the US no longer being seen as a reliable ally within NATO. Some European countries have also suggested that it's time for them to acquire their own nuclear arsenals. We've also seen louder voices in Canada, Japan, and the Republic of Korea saying similar things. So that is not official policy yet. This is more pundits, political commentators, opposition party members. But this is coming more and more into, from the fringe into more mainstream debate. And we're seeing op-eds in newspapers and other concerning signals that there is some momentum building for the possible acquisition of nuclear weapons or interest in that in these countries. We're also seeing new deals between nuclear and non-nuclear armed states, or NPT states parties and non-NPT states parties. So, for example, Canada recently announced that it's entered a new deal with India to supply uranium to its nuclear power facilities, which experts have raised the concerns that since India is a non-NPT state party and a nuclear armed state, it could actually use that uranium in its nuclear power, freeing up its own other sources for use in nuclear weapons. Canada, of course, originally facilitated India's nuclear weapon program without knowing it. And so it's really concerning that after all this time, they've restarted a nuclear deal. Then we have the Australia, United Kingdom, United States AUKUS agreement, which is going to involve the sharing of nuclear-powered submarine technology as well as highly enriched uranium with Australia. We've got a new nuclear cooperation deal between Saudi Arabia and the United States, a new military arrangement between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, in which they've said that this, the sort of defense pact includes all means, which could mean Pakistan's nuclear weapons, so a deterrence arrangement there as well. We've seen billions of dollars being spent more every year on nuclear weapons. ICANN's annual nuclear weapons spending report has been tracking that very well. We're up over $100 billion a year at this point. And this is, of course, even as the global economy is crumbling under the weight of all of these unlawful, reckless wars. The last nuclear arms control agreement between Russia and the United States expired earlier this year, which, in terms of what's now possible in the near term, it could mean more deployment of increased deployment of nuclear warheads and delivery systems. China and France are both expanding the size of their nuclear arsenals. The other nuclear armed states are all continuing with various modernization programs, so building new facilities, building new types of delivery systems, upgrading their warheads. I put in scare quotes. And so, I mean, this is a very grave picture. And overall, I think what it really shows us is that none of the nuclear armed states and very few of the nuclear supportive allies, say those within NATO or with extended nuclear deterrence relationships with some of these countries, none of these countries appear to believe themselves to be bound by international law. This seems to be the dominant perspective of states that support nuclear weapons. They seem to see international law as being out of line with their security interests, and some of them have made this quite explicit during this NPT review cycle. Others have been more subtle and cagey about it, but from their actions, it seems that they are approaching this the same way. And so law and multilateralism, which have been built over the decades since the end of World War II, in order to constrain global violence and put limits on means and methods of warfare and what countries can do to each other, these are all being abandoned in the pursuit of imperial ambitions. And the US government, as many of you probably know, is now unabashedly re-pursuing the manifest destiny for the 21st century, which really recalls an era of violent expansion, colonialism, and genocide. And it's applying it to this modern day wars for oil, for markets, for land, for security. And Amnesty International Secretary General just yesterday made a speech in which she described the US, the leaders of the US, Russia, and Israel as voracious predators. And I think that's an apt description of the leadership of these countries and the inspiration and cover it provides for very violent imperial colonial projects of other countries as well. So a little bit of a dive into this review cycle. I think I want to stay pretty shallow here, but the basic thing to know going into this review conference is that the three prepcoms leading up to this review conference really struggled to adopt any kind of outcome documents. They really struggled to reach agreement on any kind of common denominator approach to take into this review. The last PrepCom last year did not adopt recommendations for the review conference. This has become normal, unfortunately. The review conference hasn't had recommendations going into it for a few cycles now, but it also didn't manage to adopt the chair's draft decision on strengthening the NPT review process, which was sort of an initiative of the chair to try and get states to at least fix some of the working method problems, engage with issues of increasing transparency. So even that was not agreeable to the conference because it operates by consensus. So that's been treated in the NPT as everybody has to agree. And so, as has been the core problem throughout the last 3 review cycles of the NPT, the nuclear armed states and their nuclear complicit allies have refused to implement Article 6 and the NPT's core agenda of nuclear disarmament. That's essentially the main problem with the treaty. And they reject any text that holds them to the obligations that they've made in the past or that demands that they fulfill them. The 2015 and the 2022 review conferences both failed to adopt any outcome. In 2015, ostensibly, it was because of Israel, which is not an NPT state party, but it requested its proxies of the US, UK, and Canada to object to the outcome document because it didn't like the language around the Middle East weapon of mass destruction free zone that was in that draft outcome. And then in 2022, the failure was largely attributed to Russia objecting to language over its invasion and occupation and war against Ukraine. But of course, it's sort of these are the public-facing reasons for the failure. But the nuclear armed states all contributed to the failures of these past 2 review conferences because of their refusal to engage in good faith in disarmament. But I like to talk about positive things. I like to talk about opportunities. I like to talk about hope and action. And so I want to pivot away from the grim picture now to what actually might be possible or what folks are working on, and where there is some hope and determination for those of us who are nuclear abolitionists. So some NPT states parties are still trying to achieve something at this review conference, even knowing the full picture of how difficult this is going to be at this moment in time. So one initiative that a lot of states parties are trying to pursue is around transparency. So at the last few PrepComs, they've been pushing for peer-reviewed reporting mechanisms and interactive dialogues through which the nuclear armed states would offer increased transparency about their arsenals and their doctrines. Some of the nuclear armed states expressed openness to such initiatives, but honestly, from my perspective, it's really hard not to see their willingness to participate in transparency initiatives as a disingenuous way to distract from their failure to disarm. And of course, not all of the nuclear armed states are even interested in these initiatives at all. Russia and China have both said, no way. France was previously a proponent throughout this review cycle of increasing transparency, but now earlier this year, it's announced that it's no longer going to be disclosing details about its arsenal or its doctrine. So I don't really see this as a way to move forward. And again, because it isn't actually disarmament, it's challenging, I think, for those of us who want to see elimination of nuclear weapons to really push for this. But it is something that states parties will be trying for again as some sort of agreement or movement forward at this review cycle. The actions around nuclear risk reduction are another aspect of the work that I think we'll see a lot of action around from non-nuclear armed states trying to get something on paper to reduce the possible accidental or intentional use of nuclear weapons. So we're not sure, again, what's going to be possible. There's been lists and lists of good ideas to do that. And so far, none of the nuclear armed states have been able to agree on what those should be. But that'll be another push at this review conference, I reckon. Some countries have just suggested maybe we can get a reaffirmation of past outcomes and past agreements and action plans. Others have suggested maybe we could get agreement on some sort of short declaration that basically reaffirms the NPT and states' commitment to it, even if it's not adopted by consensus. So I think the bar is being set lower and lower in every conversation that I have with diplomats as we get closer to this conference. But I think that it's important for us as activists not to get sucked into worrying about what they can actually get on paper at this review conference, because I believe that while it is important, of course, to reaffirm past outcomes and commitments and to get agreement on new measures and to implement Article 6 and to, get what we can out of this conference, I think it's our job to be ambitious, regardless of what we think is possible, regardless of what our diplomatic allies are doing, regardless of what the nuclear armed states are doing. The nuclear armed states are dragging the world into chaos and violence, and the rest of the world needs to say enough and draw a line in the sand. And that's what we need to be pushing for in our interactions, particularly with the non-nuclear armed states. This moment shouldn't be about what is practical or achievable under the terms that are set by the nuclear armed states, which is nothing, right? It's about what the rest of the world is going to do about it. So I say this because this is exactly how we were able to get negotiations and adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and other disarmament instruments in the past. It's also what's led to formations like the Hague Group, and their actions to stop Israel's genocide. It's how we've reached a point where some European states are even standing up to the US in terms of its war on Iran and saying we're not going to grant you access to military bases or airspace, etc. It's all these lines that are too little, too late, but the motions of being stopped, right? Of withdrawal of complicity from certain states. And I think we need more coalitions that are willing to take these kinds of actions, and not just make rhetorical interventions in favor of disarmament. And so what we can do is demand better. So again, don't think about what's achievable, think about what the world needs and ask for that. So the abolition of nuclear weapons, victim assistance and environmental remediation, support for affected communities, etc. The Reaching Critical Will NPT briefing book has a lot of detailed recommendations across the full spectrum of issues. In case you want to take a look at what we're suggesting, I won't get into the details here, although I can deal with that in Q&A if you'd like. I'll post the link to that in a moment. But also there's the world beyond the NPT. This will last a month. Oh, thank you, Molly, for posting that. There's the world beyond the NPT. And so during the conference, after the conference, there's a lot of actions that folks can take, including divestment actions, withdrawing your finances, pension funds, banks, etc., getting them to pull out of nuclear weapon producing companies. I think Don't Bank on the Bomb will be releasing a new report this Friday about financial institutions. There's the ICANN cities appeal that you can do at a local level with your town or city. Get them to support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and call for nuclear abolition. There's the ICANN parliamentary pledge of getting your members of parliament or congresspeople to support the treaty. There's ICANN's work on schools of mass destruction, and other initiatives to get schools that are, have a sort of connection to the nuclear weapon industry, to disrupt that connection. And then there's the broader work that we can all do every day within our communities and our neighborhoods and within our families and friend circles as well, which is talking about nuclear weapons and tying it to issues that are on everybody's minds. I think it's easier in a way to talk about nuclear weapons right now because of what's happening in Iran. And I think that threat that we had of the United States president to annihilate an entire civilization. I know everybody that I know in my life, including people that don't think about these issues very much, they were scared on that Tuesday and they lived that day in fear. And so I think that having these conversations is apt in this moment of saying, the problem isn't whether or not Iran is going to get nuclear weapons. The problem is that the US and Israel do have nuclear weapons. And so the answer is no one having them. And there's a lot of ways in terms of what we're seeing now in terms of economics, violence, this, imperial approach to world politics and the undermining of international law, all of these things that people are grappling with and I think focusing on more as they look at the world are ways to introduce topics of nuclear weapons, about where our money's going, philosophies of control and coercion and exclusion and othering, etc. I think I'm going to stop there, Molly, if that's all right, and happy to go into Q&A or whatever else.